Shalom and welcome to Biblical Faith with Sam Peak. We invite you to join us as Sam brings a study in the Torah from the Jewish sages. And now our speaker, Sam Peak.
So Shalom Aleichem. We're started now. So we have begun the session. Okay. The poor people who watch this on the internet, they have no idea how rowdy this class is. And because we always start with me just trying to get you together. Okay, we're continuing Pirkei Avot, all right? This section of the Mishnah with a commentary which is based on the commentary of the Maharal of Prague, Rabbi Judah Loew of Prague, of his original writings concerning Pirkei Avot. It's in a book that's been put together for us by Rabbi Tuvia Basser. It's very, very good. Now, it's very, very good. Oh, by the way, I'm sorry. We're going to be on page 101. Oh, that's right, because you played hooky the last time we had class together, so you don't know where you were at. Okay. 101, Mishnah number 9. Okay, we're in chapter 2 of Pirkei Avot. We'll begin with Mishnah number 9. Now, let's just read that Mishnah real quick, okay? Okay. Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai, he received the tradition from Hillel and Shammai, and he used to say, if you have studied a lot of Torah, if you have studied much Torah, don't take credit for yourself. Don't get a big head, okay? Because that is what you were created to do. Now, I'll back up. We come now to the beginning the commentary of the Maharal of Prague, and the way Rabbi Basser presents it, he begins and he says, the spirit, nephesh, all right? Immediately, I'm thinking, in everything that I've done with y'all, nephesh is always, we call the lowest part of the soul. Now, we're going to go a completely different direction here than what most of us have learned in other sections of our Torah study, where we have what's called naranchi, okay? Nefesh, ruach, neshama, chaya, and yechidah, okay? Those 5 levels of a soul. And generally, and the reason I always translate nefesh as soul is because ruach we generally translate spirit. Here, Rabbi Basser is saying the spirit, nefesh. It doesn't matter. We're going to use the Hebrew terms, all right? Because I'm more comfortable with them than trying to find an exact English equivalent, all right? So, what the Maharal, I'm just giving you a heads up for what's down the road. What the Maharal does is, there's great rabbis today like Rabbi Yitzhak Ginsburg who have prepared entire Torah lessons, unbelievably complex and detailed Torah lessons on what is called the anatomy of a soul, the anatomy of a nefesh or a neshama, okay? And what the Maharal is going to do is he is going to actually show us that there are many different parts to a nefesh. The nefesh is the lowest level of our soul. It's like the foot. Our body is like a shoe for the soul, okay? And the nefesh is the foot of the entire complex of a person's soul that fits in this body, that's connected to this body, that rests in this body. What the Maharal is going to do is he is going to take just the nefesh. He's not going to necessarily be talking about these upper levels of the soul. And he is going to dissect the parts of the nefesh, okay? Is what he's going to do shortly in his commentary. Okay, I say shortly, it may take us a time or two to get to it. But I'm just, in case some of you are studying ahead, you have the book and you're studying ahead, and you get over there and say, wow, the nefesh has 5 parts, there's 5 parts of the nefesh? And Sam never told me that. What's going on with this? What's going on with that? And this doesn't sound like anything I've ever studied before or anything like that. So we're going to just a more detailed anatomy of a nefesh, the lowest part of the entire chain of a soul, okay? All right. I don't think I need to say anything more. We'll start to see what he is saying, because immediately he's getting into this. The nefesh is the part of a creature that wants. It's obviously a reference to the will to receive for yourself alone, that wants. and that instigates action in order to satisfy that want. For example, when an animal is hungry, and a lot of people don't know this, but the Torah tells us very clearly that an animal has a nefesh. There's a nefesh, they are living souls. They are nefesh chaim. But that's the lowest level, okay? When when an animal is hungry, then its nefesh is aroused. And it hunts and it eats. When it is satisfied, then its nefesh is at rest. And then the animal can curl up and go to sleep because it's satisfied. A human being now, he says, has different levels of needs. In other words, our levels of needs are not just physical. There are other levels of needs that we have too, but they still all have to do with the whole idea of the vessel of a will to receive for yourself alone. But the Maharal is going to pick those different needs into three parts, okay, of our nefesh that's in our body. When a person is hungry, then the lowest animal type of nefesh is aroused to forage and eat, to get something to eat. And then when his needs are satisfied, that nefesh rests. When a person needs companionship, then a higher level of nefesh is aroused to communicate, and then it rests when that need is satisfied. And then he says there is a spiritual need. Now he's talking about the highest level of your nefesh. There's a spiritual need to grow in wisdom. And this arouses the highest level of a human nefesh. A spiritual need cannot be satisfied with finite portions, so there is no measure of what will fill the need. And therefore, he says, this highest level of the human soul, which seeks growth, can never rest. Now, if we took that, everything that the Maharal just said about that, and if we plug that in to what we know of a nefesh in what Rabbi Ginsburg calls the 10 powers of a soul. Because a soul, a nefesh, has exactly the same 10 powers or 10 sfirot that is the basic building pattern of the entire universe. So we have Keter, the unknowable head, okay, that part that's just really unknowable. Chokmah and Binah and Dat, that's the brains. And then the rest of the body is made up of what Rabbi Ginsburg calls the emotion powers, the emotive powers of the soul. And under that, all the way in Malkut, down in the very one in Malkut, which only receives, okay, that would be the absolute bottom piece that connects us to physical life. That's the way I would see it. So we know, it's very interesting, if we go to Rabbi Yehuda Lev Ashlag now, he would define those things in other words, the animal nefesh is that part that's on the very bottom, that is the connection of what allows us to live in this physical world. And in a sense can even be defined as the Yetzer Hara. All right? Because the Yetzer Hara does not actually mean that it's evil in and of itself. It just means we can use it. Any excess in it, we can use it for evil, or using it in any way that's not Torah defined by the Torah. So that's the bottom. Then Rabbi Ashlag would say, he would call those lower powers of the soul the nations, part of your soul, and he would call the upper powers, the brains, Yisrael, part of your soul. That part that Yashar, El, that part that connects directly to God. Now, I'm only going over all this and reminding it to you because the Maharal is going to talk about all of these things also, but from a totally different way. But they're all still talking about exactly the same things, okay? All right. Okay, so if you, in this Mishnah, if you have studied much Torah, don't take credit for yourself, he says, because that is what you were created to do. Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai tells us that an elevated human being, meaning... We have to understand what that means. What does it mean, an elevated human being? It's a human being that actually is not upside down. Okay? That they're not being controlled. In other words, the boss of their nefesh is not their emotions, and it's certainly not their physical appetites. The boss of their soul, the one who's running the show, who gives them direction, is that the brains part of the soul, the mochin, chokmah binah da'at, which comes from Torah, and which would be called in Rabbi Ashlag's system, the Israel part of your soul. That's what needs to be on top. That's what an elevated human being is. I'll tell you a secret. That's what it means to be a human being, period.
Yeah.
Is to not be upside down. Seriously. Okay. So a human being, an elevated human being, he says, finds learning Torah as basic a need as eating or drinking. If that part of your soul is really in charge and really connected with Hashem and really connected to your body, to study Torah is just as important as getting something to eat. And it really is. And he says, besides man, now this is a very interesting concept that he talks about here. So why doesn't an animal, okay, so we say, well, they're not created in the image of God. That's true, but they still are called a living soul. They have a nefesh chaim. So why doesn't an animal have that same kind of a spiritual connection? Listen to what the Maharal says. It's very interesting. Other than man, he says, all of creation was cast in a complete and a finished state, and therefore it remains stable. It's satisfied. Its nefesh is at rest. Mankind alone was created unfinished. And a human being's completion is achieved by his actualizing his potential. By the way, the real definition of chet, in Hebrew, chet means, it's usually translated as a sin. It literally, really and truly is an archery term that has to do with missing the bullseye. So why is missing the bullseye, why is that a sin? What in the world is that talking about? And if anyone listened to Rabbi Richmond not too long ago on his temple talk, he said very clearly, he says what it actually means is that we didn't, in that instance, whatever that was, we didn't live up to our potential. Now that's a whole nother way of looking than most people look, even spiritual people. Sometimes we are walking around thinking, and Rabbi Ashlag talks about this too, what a disgusting thing we are. Because we're so far from Hashem, and because we mess up, and this and that, and all of those things. But the opposite side of the deal is what's really true. Your Yetzer Hara, it wants you to think you're a despicable person. Why even try? You can't do it anyway. Why even try, it tells you. Why try to pray? Don't do that. What good's it going to do? Not only that, you can't do it right anyway, and you're bound to mess it up, so why even try? Because you're flawed. You're messed up, all right? And unless somebody comes and fixes you, you can't do anything. The idea of chet means that you have the potential to hit the bullseye every time. Every time. So that's a totally different idea than what we think of all the time. So anyway, actualizing his potential. Then he says one can never reach such a state of perfection, in other words, or completion. We're never complete. That's the deal. But we have the potential to just go on and on and on and on. So we can't reach the end of that we can find a time to actually rest, at least not while we're in this body. For human perfection, he says, that is growth itself. The converse is also true, he says. One who does not grow has no fulfillment. And then the Maharal says, what is the proper field for nurturing human growth? What does it take to actually grow a human? The Torah. That's what it takes. The highest human soul, he says, the highest human soul is the purely intellectual spirit, which the Maharal calls Sekel Nidal. Now again, he's not talking about Yechidah. He's not talking about outside of this body. All right? He's talking about the nefesh that is at rest, or resting in this body. So the highest part of that nefesh, his term for it, is Sekel Nivdal, which actually means a separated intellect, a separate intellect. He says, and this is the spirit that moves people to intellectual development and expression. If we were to put it, his term, Sekel Nivdal, would be talking about the exact same things as the brains of the of the 10 powers of the soul, or as the highest point, or the Israel part of the soul that Rabbi Ashlag talks about. It's the same thing. He says, and this is the spirit that moves people to intellectual development and expression, and this spirit never reaches such a state of completeness in a Jew that he could ever be totally at rest. He's constantly, in other words, and it's also the same for all of you. If you're connected to the Torah and you're connected to Israel, it's the exact same. I don't place that distinction there because Torah study is just as important for you in connecting with the Torah and connecting with Hashem and connecting with Israel. So it goes on and on. It never reaches a state of completeness that can actually come to be totally at rest. It can never be static, and it constantly moves to actualize itself. Shabbat, he says, for example, Shabbat is a day of rest only really from physical endeavors, but not from Torah, because we were created to toil in the Torah. This is why we were created. This is exactly what Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai said. If you've studied a lot of Torah, don't take credit for that, because that's what you were created to do. Such continuous development and expression, he says, of the seko, the intellect, or that highest part of your soul, that is the essence of human existence. And this is the meaning of the phrase, and this is in Kohelet 7:1, Ecclesiastes, the day of death is better than the day of birth. At birth, one is not yet a complete creation. He has just started a lifetime of development. But on the day of death, however, one has achieved as much growth and fulfillment as they can. And I would put it as they can. They say as he will ever achieve. I don't agree with that completely. But as they can achieve, at least in that particular life, and is now prepared to rest. Okay. Now, as the Maharal always does, he tries to show us the relationships between the different Mishnayot. So he has a section here entitled The Relationship to the Previous Mishnah. You remember what the previous Mishnah was. It was that rough one that I probably got in a lot of trouble about, you know, where Hillel used to say, the more flesh, the more worms, the more possessions, the more worry, the more wives, the more witchcraft, and the more maidservants, the more lewdness, the more menservants, the more thievery. But the more Torah, the more life. The more study, the more wisdom, the more counsel, the more understanding, the more charity, the more peace. That Mishnah. So, he said that previous Mishnah taught us that in all of the material aspects of life, the strictly physical material aspects of life, that if we take them in moderation, that actually can become the foundation actually for spiritual growth. But after a physical need is fulfilled, then every excess over that, instead of providing a foundation in this world for spiritual growth, it leads to deterioration. It also taught us that the spiritual aspects of life can actually never be complete. They can only grow. We can only continue to add to them. You know, I hear that all the time, you know. I'm studying, but I don't always feel closer to Hashem than when I started. Well, number one, maybe you're studying for the wrong reason. Maybe you're studying because you're wanting to get something out of it for yourself, and that's not the way to study the Torah. The way to study the Torah is because it pleases Hashem that we study His Torah. And that, honestly, I'm telling you, you'll put your Torah study on a different level if you'll just think that for 5 seconds before you start ever to study any Torah. I'm studying to please Hashem, not that I want to get something out of it. But even the idea of coming closer to Hashem, how does I want to say it? The reason sometimes maybe we don't feel like it is because He is infinite. And the closer you come to infinity, it's still so far beyond you. But that doesn't mean that you can't come close to Him. Absolutely not. And anyway, let's go on. I could get off there for a long time and I'll never get past this page. Okay. So it also taught us, it says, the spiritual aspects of life can never be complete, they can only grow, and that they should be cultivated. Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai's statement that if you have studied much Torah, don't take credit for yourself because that's what you were created to do, That is a natural continuation of what Hillel was telling us before. I think it was Hillel, wasn't it? Let me make sure. I don't want to put, yeah, I'm positive it was. Yeah, absolutely. Okay. So Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai, now this is the next thing they take up. He is actually mentioned out of chronological order. And by the way, so also was Hillel before him there. It jumped a little bit. But and that's in order to connect Hillel to Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai. He is mentioned out of chronological order because he lived before Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi. And Yehuda HaNasi begins this chapter 2 of Pirkei Avot. By rights, Rabban Yochanan should have been listed actually in chapter 1, immediately after Hillel and Shammai. One reason for placing his words in this chapter is that his next statements, in other words, he's going to bring some more Mishnayot, 10 through 14, and they are much, much longer and much more detailed than the little brief one-liners that the rabbis were giving us in chapter 1. But, and this comes from the Maharal now, not from me, but another reason is that the order of Mishnayot in chapter 1 was based on the chain of formal Torah transmission. In other words, this generation received it from that one, okay? And that came to an end. That formal transmission, airtight transmission, came to an end with Hillel and Shammai. Rabban Yochanan did receive his Torah knowledge from Hillel and Shammai. He was not included as a part of the chain of formal Torah transmission. But this Mishnah, Mishnah 9, accords Rabban Yochanan the honor of the term received, kabel, okay? To spare him the humiliation of actually being the head, the leader of the first generation that is not mentioned in the chain of Torah transmission. He could not be mentioned in the first chapter because he received the Torah in a manner which was not up to the standards of all those before him. A little bit different. And why was that, by the way? In Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai, what is he's well known for many, many things. But one of the things was, you know, the Holy Temple was destroyed in his generation. He was in the city of Jerusalem, locked in there. God had already told him, I'm going to destroy the temple. He knew the temple was to be destroyed. And it was kind of like, you know, in the days of Jeremiah, God told Jeremiah, tell the people, don't resist the Babylonians, because the more you resist, the more they're going to kill you. And pretty much with Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai the same way. Jewish zealots in those days, they would not let him out, so they actually faked his death, and he went out in a coffin. He was smuggled out in a coffin to be buried outside the walls, and they took him to the Vespasian, the general, and he made a deal with him. And actually, this is how Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai assured us that all of the oral Torah would not have been destroyed in that generation in the city of Jerusalem. And at Yavne, Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai set up a Sanhedrin, set up a yeshiva, and taught the oral Torah, continued the tradition. Otherwise, much of it would have been lost with the destruction of all of the sages in Jerusalem. So he really was a very, very important person. And of course, he would have been called probably a coward in that day by the zealots. But the deal is God spoke to him, and he knew, as all the rabbis of that generation did, that the Holy Temple was going to be destroyed, no matter what we did. And so he looked with some prophetic vision down the long road. And thank God, I'm telling you, thank God for Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai, or we might not even be sitting here with a Mishnah to read. Seriously. Okay. Well, the next 4 Mishnayot have to do with Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai and 5 of his principal disciples. And Maharal, in his commentary, he deals with them all as a unit. Mishnah 10, 11, 12, 13, and 14. So it's really 5 Mishnayot. And he does it all as a unit. And he explains them in 2 ways. First, he explains a literal, a Peshat level of interpretation with them. And then he moves up and really into a sod level. He jumps from Peshat all the way to sod, a really Kabbalistic interpretation of it, showing that they are representative of things that take place at the very structure of a nefesh, of a human soul, okay? And that's why the Maharal did all this introductory work on talking about a nefesh. And Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai says, praises each student for a particular outstanding quality that they had. And the Maharal is going to show which specific element, what part of a nefesh, okay, of that student's soul is responsible for his outstanding quality, and how that influences his choice of the good path that a person should follow, that a person should adopt for their life. So first, it's going to go through all of these on a Peshat level, literal level, and then he's going to move to a much more profound level in relation to the soul. I guess let's end what we have here. How much time do we have? 5? Oh, let's see how far we can go. If we don't do anything else, then just read Mishnah 10, 11, 12, 13, and 14. So Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai, he had 5 disciples, actually, it says. Now, we know he had more than that, so they put in brackets here, primary disciples, top disciples. And they were Rabbi Eliezer ben Hirchanos. Actually, it's Hurchanos in Hebrew. I'm not sure why they put a Y in that, because it's very obviously Hur. Anyway, Rabbi Yehoshua ben Hananya, Rabbi Yosei HaKohen, Rabbi Shimon ben Netanel, and Rabbi Elazar ben Arak. And he used to enumerate, interesting, the word that's used, it literally means he used to count their praises. And Rabbi Eliezer ben Hurchanos is like a cemented cistern that loses not a drop. And Rabbi Yehoshua ben Hananya, praiseworthy is she who bore him. Rabbi Yosei HaKohen is a scrupulously pious person, a real chassid. Rabbi Shimon ben Netanel, he fears sin. And Rabbi Elazar ben Arak is like a spring that flows stronger and stronger. And he used to say, meaning Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai, that if all the sages of Israel were on one pan of a balance scale, and Eliezer ben Hurchanos were on the other, then Rabbi Eliezer would outweigh them all. Now this is kind of weird here, because Abba Shaul suddenly jumps in the middle of the Mishnah of Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai. And Abba Shaul said in his name, okay, and it points out here that Abba Shaul is not himself disagreeing with Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai. He is relating a different version of what Rabban Yochanan had said, okay? So Abba Shaul said in his name, in the name of Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai, if all the sages of Israel, with even Rabbi Eliezer ben Hurchanos were among them were on one pan of a balanced scale, and Rabbi Elazar ben Arak were on the other pan, Rabbi Elazar ben Arak would outweigh them all. And he said to them, meaning Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai said to them, go out and discern which is the good path to which a man should cling, to which he should be glued. And this was the answers. Rabbi Eliezer says, Ayin Tova, a good eye. Rabbi Yehoshua says, a good friend. Rabbi Yosei says, a good neighbor. Rabbi Shimon says, one who considers the outcome of a deed. Think it through. And Rabbi Elazar says, a good heart. All right? Lev Tov. And he said to them, meaning Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai said to them, I prefer the words of Elazar ben Arak to your words. Why? Because your words are all included in his words. In other words, the concept of a good heart includes all of those things. Mishnah 14, he said to them, go out and discern which is the evil path from which a man should distance himself. And these were the answers. Rabbi Eliezer says, ain ra'ah, a bad eye, a wicked eye, an evil eye. Rabbi Yehoshua says, a wicked friend. Rabbi Yosef says, a wicked neighbor. Rabbi Shimon says, one who borrows and does not repay. One who borrows from man is like one who borrows from the omnipresent one, as it is said, quoting Psalm 37:21, the wicked one borrows and does not repay, but the righteous one is gracious and gives. Rabbi Elazar says, a wicked heart. And he, Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai, said to them, I prefer the words of Elazar ben Arak to your words, for your words are included in his words. Okay? Meaning that covers the whole thing. Okay. We don't have time to jump, but we will the very next time, and we'll go through real quickly through the Peshat level of the Maharal's commentary on this, moving quickly on to his Kabbalistic approach actually to this, and what he calls the anatomy of the soul in the body, okay? And he'll have 5 parts of the soul that's in a body, all right? I'm just mentioning all this so that you don't confuse what he's talking about with the 5, what we also call the 5 parts of the soul, meaning from nefesh to yechidah, okay? Neurotic. So he goes through this very much so, and it will be very interesting. It's going to take us a while to do because he's going to point out a lot of things here. It will be a very good learning experience for us to plow through it together, okay? So bear with me, and we will plow through it a little bit at a time. And I'm sure there will be some life lessons for us there, absolutely, as there is all the time, anytime we get together and study anything from the Torah. God is always teaching us something. Okay. All right, Yofi Tofi. I hope everybody's happy.
Yes.
And by all means, start to pray. Seriously, what we were talking about before this teaching even started. So we'll just leave that as a teaser to the people there that we're working on a whole new movement that people should pray. All right? Okay. All right. Yofi Tofi. All right. I'm finished. I'm not going further because I don't have time. Even though I notice the camera is not shut off yet. So I'll say Shalom Uvracha, peace and a blessing to you. Bye.
Thank you for joining us in our study. If you enjoyed this study and are interested in learning more from the Torah and the sages of Israel, then check us out on the internet at www.bfm101.com, or you may contact us toll-free at 1-800-639-0169. Our mailing address is Biblical Faith, P.O. Box 2, Abilene, Texas 79604. Until next time, we wish you Shalom Uvracha, peace and a blessing.